Hey guys, today we're going to make sautéed butternut squash. We're going to go over a few things, including the best way to cut a squash because these things are hard, and also the best way to select a squash and some nutrition information as well. Now our recipe includes blooming spices. Because these are pretty simple ingredients, it's sautéing butternut squash, the spices are where they're at. So we're going to add in a little thyme and sage, and I'm going to show you how to bloom spices. I'm Jessie Goodsu, I'm a registered dietitian, and I love to expand your diet through culinary education. A couple things when selecting the perfect butternut squash. I have a few here. You really want to look for a nice shaped one because it just makes them easier to cut. And also, looking at the stem, you really want to make sure that they're nice and brown, that they're attached well, and that the whole skin is pretty well without blemishes or deep cuts. You expect some little things here and there, but you don't want big open gashes anywhere. And then the color will be a light to dark beige color depending on the time of year. Okay, so to cut a butternut squash, first you need a really sharp knife. This is called a nikiri knife. It's actually a Japanese layered knife. So this is wicked sharp. A santoku knife would work here as well, but you really want a nice, solid, sharp knife. First, I'll start with chopping off both ends, and this will give you an even place to start slicing. So now I can rest it on its edge, and then I'm gonna take a peeler of any sort, grab the open end or the cut end, and just peel. So now I have it nice and peeled, and I'm going to cut straight through the center, and then that will help to get the seeds out. So I'll grab a spoon and scoop the seeds. Butternut squash is, because of the orange color, you know right off the bat that it is high in vitamin A. It also provides a good source of vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, manganese, and then it has a good amount of fiber and a little bit of protein. You don't get a ton of protein from squash, but you get a little bit. So we're just gonna scoop these seeds out. You can absolutely reserve these and bake them or dry them and replant them next year. So now we'll take our knife, flat side down, and the seeds are scooped out, and we will cut through about 1 inch slices so that they are uniform when we go to cook, which is really important to help make sure that everything cooks through at the same time. And I'm just gonna square these ends off and go ahead and cut inch pieces until I get to this bulb, and then I will turn them and start cutting them on their sides so that you get roughly, 1 inch by 1 inch cube pieces. But here, I'm just gonna grab a couple and even the sides up a little bit. Find that cutting and holding onto the bulb end is easier than the other way around. So something to keep in mind. We're just going to transfer them over to our hot skillet and start to bloom those spices. Let's prep our herbs to bloom them. Have you ever bloomed spices? Really what this means is just adding the spices at the beginning of the cooking process instead of at the end. So say you make a chili recipe and the recipe calls for adding the spices after the meat and much of the ingredients are already in. Well, that doesn't add as much flavor as, say, if you would add the spices at the beginning of the cooking process. So spices to bloom can be added to a hot oil by themselves, or if you're going to use aromatics like garlic and onion, you would add them alongside when you add those items. And this is a really good technique for hearty, woody herbs like thyme and rosemary and sage. It's not so good for things like cilantro or basil, much more delicate herbs that you'd add at the end of a cook process. So I just cut these out of my yard. So I'm going to cut the sage up into little minced up pieces And about a tablespoon of fresh is equal to a teaspoon of dried. I really would love if you had fresh here, but if you don't, then don't worry about it. Just use the equivalent of the dried spice. And then for thyme, these are on this woody stem. You don't want to eat the woody stem, but you do want to pull it off the stem, and you can do that simply with your hands and run it against the grain. But you can also, because we're blooming these, you can toss the whole twig in and then pull it out before you eat. It's up to you whether you want to leave it in or pull it out. Okay, my oil is warm, so I'm going to toss in my spices. Ooh, she's a hot one. So we're at about 4 or 5 minutes. I'm starting to smell the herbs, and we're about ready to be finished with these, I think. Blooming spices is great to intensify that flavor. These are woody herbs, and so they have a lot of fat-soluble, volatile compounds that help to accentuate the flavor. So adding those to a fat like olive oil helps to accentuate that flavor both into the oil and pulls it from the spice itself. So then when we add the butternut squash in, it's just gonna like wrap that squash in all that flavor. Okay, we are ready to toss in our squash. So in the full squash goes, and I'm going to salt it, and then we'll roll it around in that oil. This salt helps to obviously season it, but soften as well. It breaks down those cell walls and softens. So we will cook the squash for about 15 minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Keep an eye on it. I've got the heat on. I'm going to turn it up a little bit higher now that we've added some ingredients. It is at about a medium high perhaps. I'm going to stir it to coat it and then leave it alone. When you leave any vegetables alone for a little while, they have a chance to get that brown on the bottom. So I'm going to resist the urge to mix them around once I get them settled where I want them. So I'm going to salt them one more time. It's on a medium, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes and check on them. Okay, we're at about 10 minutes now. There's a little bit of browning. A little bit of softness in some, but I still have, they're not quite fork tender. So I tossed them around, and we will come back again. We're at about 30 minutes, and I have this on medium. So depending on the size of your squash and the temp of your stove, it's going to take anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes to saute these butternut squash. But you can see they are fork tender and nicely browned. Really, really tasty. They're so good. Look at that guy. Woo, woo. Okay, we are at 30 minutes. So our squash are nicely fork tender. They're golden brown. They're really tasty and really fragrant. This is a great side to whatever dish you're preparing for the fall, but you can also add in like ground turkey and goat cheese and make it like a one-pot meal too. That's what I'm gonna do tonight with this. But I hope you head over to my website and be sure to subscribe for all the seasonal recipes and food preservation so that your garden goodies don't go bad.